A dozen Popeyes restaurants in central Georgia are still vacant after shutting down.
They've remained closed, and again, they were also closed yesterday.
Yeah, it's getting rough out here. Popeyes is shutting down locations across the U.S., and Trump's tariffs are getting the blame. People are frustrated, businesses are bleeding, and now the question is, what's Trump going to do about it?
We've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore.
Well, judging by that, he's not backing down, and neither are the countries fighting back. I've got all the details on this escalating trade war. Let's get into it. According to viral reports, hundreds of Popeyes restaurants are shutting down across the U.S. Not because of bad chicken, not because of competition, but because of Donald Trump's tariffs. Yes, you heard that right. Former President Trump's escalating trade war may have just decimated one of America's most beloved fast food chains. But wait, it gets worse. What if I told you the closures started not in big cities, but in small-town America, in places already struggling to survive? What if I told you that in some cases, the shutters came down overnight? And what if I told you Trump might not be able to stop it even if he wanted to? Stick around, because the most shocking part of this story is still coming. Let's rewind for a second. Earlier this year, Donald Trump launched his most aggressive trade policy to date, an economic Hail Mary that some insiders quietly called Tariffs 2.0. The former president imposed sweeping taxes on imports, 10% on nearly everything, and up to 145% on goods coming from China. It was part of his promise to bring manufacturing back home and punish countries that he says have ripped off America for years.
We've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore.
But behind the bravado, the real economic impact was already beginning to ripple through the economy. One of the first casualties? Fast food, specifically chains like Popeyes that rely heavily on imported cooking oil, packaging, aluminum, and poultry feed, all hit by Trump's new tariffs. Now here's the part they're not telling you in the headlines. A leaked financial report from franchise operator RRG Inc., one of Popeyes' largest regional partners, showed that rising operational costs due to tariffs were unsustainable and directly contributed to the closure of 3 restaurants in Georgia earlier this year. Bankruptcy filings soon followed. Then, quietly, more closures started popping up. A few in North Carolina, then Fresno, California, then elsewhere across the South. To many, it looked like isolated incidents. But what we've learned is that the closures were part of a larger pattern. On social media, employees began anonymously posting messages. They told us last night our store was done, no warning, just shut down, said costs were too high and we couldn't keep up. In one viral Facebook post, 4 Popeyes locations in North Carolina were confirmed to be closing. That's not one city. That's an entire region losing jobs. Was it purely financial mismanagement by the franchisees? Possibly, but multiple reports, including from The Street, show that franchisees were caught off guard by the sudden spike in prices, especially import-related goods. Packaging alone increased by nearly 30% in some regions. And the reason that's important? Because in Trump's own words, he doesn't care.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. I'll do anything, sir.
This isn't just about chicken sandwiches anymore. It's about the collateral damage of a trade war being waged by one man, with nearly zero input from Congress. But here's the real kicker. Despite the narrative of mass closures, the official line from Popeye's parent company, Restaurant Brands International, says the opposite. Their Q1 2025 financial report claims that the number of Popeye's locations actually grew from 3,412 to 3,516. That's a net increase. So what's going on? Well, 2 things can be true at once. National chains often expand in profitable areas while quietly closing weaker locations. It's a restructuring strategy, and it's common, but that doesn't change what's happening at the community level, where towns lose one of their only affordable fast food spots overnight. And that restructuring, it becomes necessary when the cost of doing business explodes, like it did when Trump slapped tariffs on nearly everything that moves. But could Trump stop this? Could he reverse the chaos he set in motion? Not anymore. Just this week, on May 29th, a federal trade court ruled that Trump's sweeping tariffs were unlawful. In a landmark decision, judges stated that the president had overstepped his legal authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, effectively blocking the tariffs from moving forward. Legal experts say this ruling guts Trump's ability to wage a unilateral trade war, and the markets, they responded instantly. The NPR reported a surge in Asian stocks and a sharp uptick in the US dollar, a sign that investors are betting the trade war might finally cool down. But don't celebrate just yet. The White House, yes, Trump's White House, is already planning an appeal. That means the tariffs could come roaring back. And if that happens, the business is barely hanging on, like those local Popeyes joints could finally collapse for good. And what does Trump have to say about all this?
I need some guy telling me how to negotiate.
No remorse, no strategy, just ego. We spoke to Thomas Sowell, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, who warned about the dangers of unchecked tariffs. He pointed out that starting a global trade war is like playing with fire. Everybody loses, he said. And all that happens is a great reduction in international trade, as he stated here. So let's be clear. Whether or not Trump meant to target Popeyes, the consequences are real. Stores are closing. People are losing jobs. Communities are being hollowed out, all because of an economic policy that some say was driven more by vengeance than vision. And unless something changes, this story may not end with Popeyes. It might just be the beginning. President Trump's decision to delay imposing 50% tariffs on European Union imports until July 9th has triggered one of the most significant market rallies we've seen this year. But what led to this dramatic reversal, and what does it mean for your investments?
She just called me, as you know, and she asked for an extension on the June 1st date. And she said she wants to get down to serious negotiation because I've told you specifically, haven't I told anybody that would listen? They have to do that.
The president's announcement came after a call with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on May 25th, who had requested the extension. The original threat of massive tariffs, announced just days earlier, had sent shockwaves through global markets. But here's what the numbers tell us about the market's response. European stocks closed significantly higher on May 26th, with the Pan-European Stock 600 rising 1%. The French CAC 40 jumped 1.2%, while Germany's DAX surged 1.6%. The automotive sector, particularly vulnerable to trade disruptions, saw dramatic recovery. European auto stocks rebounded from a 3% loss to close 1.7% higher, with German car makers like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen gaining between 2% and 2.6%.
I believe June 9th would be, July 9th would be the date. That was the date she requested. Could we move it from June 1st to July 9th? And I agreed to do that, and that she said we will rapidly get together and see if we can work something out.
American markets, closed for Memorial Day on May 26th, showed their enthusiasm when they reopened. U.S. stock futures had surged overnight following the tariff delay announcement. When trading resumed on May 27th, the results were striking. The S&P 500, tracked by the SPY ETF, demonstrated the market's relief. From a close of 579.0 on May 23rd, before the tariff threat fully impacted markets, the index climbed to 591.3 on May 27th, then continued rising to 596.609 on May 28th. That represents a recovery of over 17 points in just 5 trading days. Bloomberg reported that Wall Street kicked off the week with a significant rally, with the S&P 500 climbing 2% on May 27th. The gains weren't limited to one sector. Technology and consumer discretionary stocks led the charge, with the Technology Select Sector Spider advancing 2.4% and Consumer Discretionary Select Sector Spider gaining 3% on May 28th. But what makes this story particularly intriguing is the timing. The delay comes as global coronavirus activity is increasing, with new variants spreading internationally. Trade stability becomes even more crucial during periods of economic uncertainty. The broader context reveals just how volatile this situation had become. On May 23rd, Trump's initial tariff threat led to a sell-off, reflecting investor concerns over potential trade wars and economic impacts. The May 25th delay provided crucial breathing room, but market analysts warn this is temporary. What's particularly telling is how this aligns with global trends. During his announcement, the president noted that most countries have moved away from certain aggressive trade policies, suggesting this delay might reflect broader strategic recalibration rather than simple negotiation tactics. The extension to July 9th creates a new deadline that coincides with other major economic developments. Trade negotiations will now run parallel to congressional debates over tax legislation and budget reconciliation, potentially creating either momentum for comprehensive economic policy or additional uncertainty if multiple fronts face setbacks simultaneously. For investors, this reprieve has clearly boosted confidence, but the underlying tensions remain. European markets continue monitoring trade negotiations closely, while American sectors with significant EU exposure, from technology to automotive to agriculture, are watching July 9th as their next crucial date. The question now becomes whether 6 weeks provides sufficient time for meaningful progress, or whether this delay merely postpones inevitable economic disruption. Next up, Congress rarely moves with lightning speed, but when it does, the results can reshape America's economic landscape for decades. The One Big Beautiful Bill, officially titled the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, H.R. 1, passed the House on May 22nd with the narrowest possible margin, 215-214. Now it faces the Senate, where the real battle begins. What exactly makes this bill so significant and so controversial? At its core, this is a comprehensive tax reform package designed to extend and expand tax cuts from the 2017 Trump tax plan, while funding border security and stimulating economic growth. But the details reveal just how massive this legislation truly is.
There's absolutely no requirement that the Senate take the House bill as anything definitive at all. It has passed the chamber with all Republican votes, and they have a tiny majority. But the Senate will do this as they wish.
The bill's provisions read like a conservative wish list. It includes making business tax deductions permanent, adjusting individual tax rates and deductions, and modifying estate taxes to help family farms pass to the next generation. Supporters claim families could gain over $13,000 in take-home pay, while the package also includes $12.5 billion for modernizing including Federal Aviation Administration facilities. But here's where the politics get complicated. The House passage required last-minute intervention from President Trump to keep the Republican conference together, highlighting internal GOP tensions that could resurface in the Senate.
I think a lot of the debates about the harder edges around things like Medicaid and phase outs for clean energy subsidies, things like that, softened. Secondly, I do think you get a little bit of a nod to the rising bond vigilanteism by some additional cuts.
The Senate presents a fundamentally different challenge. Unlike the House's majoritarian structure, the Senate operates more like 53 CEOs, all of whom's desires and whims have to be accommodated, as one analyst described it. This creates leverage for individual senators to demand modifications. Senator Ron Johnson exemplifies this dynamic. The first goal of our budget reconciliation process should be to reduce the deficit. This actually increases, he stated, highlighting Republican concerns about fiscal responsibility that could derail the legislation. Opposition extends beyond Republican deficit hawks. Democrats have labeled it one big ugly bill and the GOP tax scam, arguing it prioritizes tax cuts for the wealthy while potentially increasing the federal deficit by trillions. They point to analyses suggesting more than 10 million people could lose health care coverage under certain provisions.
And part of that, I think, for your audience too, means that you've seen the high watermark of SALT, because they needed SALT to get votes in the House. They don't need SALT to get votes in the Senate. So SALT's back in the firing line.
The state and local tax SALT deduction issue illustrates how Senate dynamics could reshape the bill. While House Republicans needed SALT provisions to secure votes from high-tax states, Senate Republicans face different political pressures, potentially eliminating these costly provisions. Business groups are rallying behind the legislation, with endorsements from the Business Roundtable, American Petroleum Institute, and nearly 1,000 organizations total. The American Farm Bureau Federation particularly supports estate tax modifications, while the National Federation of Independent Business backs provisions supporting small businesses.
You know, I'm a big fan, even in my personal life, of the adage that work expands to fill the time allotted. Certainly that's how the Congress operates.
Time pressure adds another layer of complexity. The debt ceiling creates an ultimate backstop, whether in August, September, or possibly late July. But July 4th represents a more political deadline, with the White House hoping to combine tax bill passage with trade deal announcements and economic stimulus. Senate Democrats might use a Congressional Review Act resolution to challenge or delay the bill, potentially consuming valuable floor time. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are already preparing for a rewrite, expecting to address deficit concerns and other modifications. The stakes couldn't be higher. President Trump called this arguably the most significant piece of legislation that will ever be signed in the history of our country, language that reflects both ambition and the enormous pressure for success. As this legislation moves through the Senate's complex procedures, every modification, every hold, and every compromise could determine whether this becomes historic achievement or legislative failure. Next up, 10 dangerous inmates. One security breach. 7.5 hours before anyone noticed they were gone. The May 16th escape from the Orleans Parish Justice Center represents one of Louisiana's largest jailbreaks in history, and 2 fugitives remain at large, considered armed and extremely dangerous. How does a maximum security facility lose track of 10 inmates for nearly 8 hours? The answer reveals systematic security failures that have residents across multiple states on edge. The escape began around 12:23 a.m. on May 16th, when inmates exploited faulty locks to pull off a cell door and cut through bars. They created a hole behind a toilet and sink, removing the fixtures to crawl through, then fled through a loading dock. Using blankets to avoid barbed wire, they scaled the perimeter wall and crossed Interstate 10. But here's what makes this story truly alarming. The escape wasn't discovered until a routine head count at 8:30 a.m. approximately 7.5 hours later. Even then, public notification was delayed, with the first alert issued around 11 a.m. and a citywide alert not sent until 2:30 p.m. The inmates who escaped weren't petty criminals. These were individuals charged with murder, aggravated assault with firearms, armed robbery, and domestic abuse involving strangulation. Orleans Parish Sheriff Susan Hudson stated it was almost impossible for the inmates to escape without inside help, a suspicion that proved accurate. A jail employee witnessed the escape on surveillance but failed to report it, leading to 3 employees being suspended without pay. More damaging still, jail maintenance worker Sterling Williams was arrested on May 19th for allegedly turning off water to facilitate toilet removal. The manhunt has produced mixed results. 8 of the 10 escapees have been recaptured, with captures spanning from New Orleans to Texas. The timeline reveals the massive scope of this operation. DeKeenan Dennis, Robert Moody, and Kendall Miles were captured on May 16th, with Miles found hiding under a car in a French Quarter hotel garage. Gary Price was captured on May 19th, followed by Corey Boyd on May 20th. The most recent captures occurred on May 26th. Lenton Van Buren was arrested in Baton Rouge, while Jermaine Donald and Leo Tate were captured in Walker County, Texas, demonstrating how far these fugitives had traveled. But 2 inmates remain at large, and their profiles are particularly concerning. Antoine Massey, 33, is charged with domestic abuse involving strangulation and automotive theft. What makes him especially dangerous? He's a 4-time escapee, previously ineligible for ankle monitoring because he repeatedly cut off electronic devices. Derek Groves, 28, presents an even greater threat. He's convicted of second-degree murder and serving a life sentence. For someone with nothing left to lose, the stakes of avoiding recapture couldn't be higher. The manhunt continues across Louisiana and neighboring states, including Texas and Mississippi. Rewards totaling $20,000 per inmate have been offered, with contributions from the FBI, ATF, and Crime Stoppers. Investigation has expanded dramatically. A total of 13 individuals have been arrested for aiding the escapees, including jail employees, other inmates, and outside acquaintances. Arrests continued through May 27th, 28, suggesting the conspiracy reached far beyond the jail's walls. This incident exposes deeper problems at the Orleans Parish Justice Center. The facility has a documented history of security issues and poor conditions, which this escape has thrust into the spotlight. The nearly 10-hour delay between escape and public notification particularly troubles community leaders and legal experts. The timing couldn't be worse for public confidence. With possible sightings reported in Mississippi, the search has become a regional concern. Law enforcement agencies across the Gulf Coast are coordinating efforts, but questions persist about how many more accomplices might be involved. What makes this case especially significant is its scale and sophistication. This wasn't an opportunistic escape. It required planning, inside knowledge, and coordinated assistance. The systematic failure to detect the breach for hours suggests security protocols need complete overhaul. As the manhunt enters its second week, residents across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas remain on alert. Until Antoine Massey and Derek Groves are recaptured, the threat to public safety continues. Their capture will close this chapter, but the systemic failures that enabled their escape demand lasting solutions. The question isn't just when these final fugitives will be caught, it's whether the Orleans Parish Justice Center can prevent this from happening again. Moving on to one of the most significant shifts in federal health policy since the pandemic began, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced on May 27th that the CDC will no longer recommend COVID-19 vaccines for healthy children and pregnant women. The decision, made without consultation with CDC advisory committees, has ignited fierce debate about vaccine policy, public health, and government decision-making. What prompted this dramatic reversal, and what does it mean for millions of Americans? The announcement came through a video message on X, featuring Kennedy alongside FDA Commissioner Martin Makary and NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya, signaling high-level administration support for the policy shift. Kennedy's reasoning focuses on evidence gaps. There is no evidence healthy kids need the vaccine today, he stated, noting that most countries globally have stopped recommending COVID vaccines for children. The changes took effect immediately, removing these groups from the CDC's official immunization schedule. But the devil is in the details. Under the new framework, COVID-19 vaccines are now recommended only for individuals 65 years and older, plus people with high-risk conditions including asthma, cancer, diabetes, obesity, smoking history, and pregnancy complications. This group encompasses an estimated 200 million Americans. For everyone else, clinical trials are now required for healthy children and adults under 65, a process that will take at least 6 months. This effectively prevents any fall approvals for these populations, fundamentally altering America's vaccination landscape. The medical community's response has been swift and polarized. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists expressed extreme disappointment, with President Stephen J. Fleischman stating concerns about COVID-19 dangers during pregnancy and protective benefits for newborns. ACOG points to evidence supporting maternal vaccination benefits, citing data showing reduced infant hospitalization rates when mothers are vaccinated. Their clinical guidance continues recommending vaccination during pregnancy, creating tension between professional medical recommendations and federal policy. Michael Osterholm, director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, criticized the decision as made on the fly, without new consultation or information since the FDA's previous guidance just 1 week earlier. The timing raises additional concerns. This policy shift comes as global coronavirus activity is increasing, with new variants spreading internationally. Critics question whether reducing vaccine recommendations during rising viral activity serves public health interests, but supporters see this differently. Kennedy's long-standing vaccine skepticism, evidenced by his February 2025 statement that Pfizer's mRNA vaccine should never have been approved and claiming it killed more people than it saved, reflects consistent policy positions rather than sudden shifts. His administration has taken systematic steps toward more rigorous vaccine approval processes. In February 2025, Kennedy paused a multi-million-dollar contract for a new COVID-19 vaccine, and on May 1st, 2025, ordered placebo-controlled trials for all new vaccines, including measles and COVID. The practical implications extend beyond policy debates. While vaccines will likely remain covered for Medicare and Medicaid-eligible individuals, private insurance coverage for those with loosely defined high-risk conditions remains uncertain. People with conditions like physical inactivity might face coverage challenges. More concerning for some families, non-eligible individuals may struggle to obtain vaccines off-label, as healthcare providers, especially pharmacies, might be reluctant to administer them without official recommendations. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is scheduled to vote on these recommendations at the end of June, but Kennedy's announcement of immediate implementation suggests the vote may be largely procedural. The broader context reveals deeper tensions within health bureaucracy. The Washington Post reported that the announcement blindsided the agency, suggesting limited coordination with CDC and HHS officials despite Kennedy's cabinet position. March of Dimes responded by urging science-based care, while other organizations grapple with reconciling federal recommendations with their clinical guidelines. As of May 29th, the CDC's official immunization schedule had not been updated to reflect these changes, despite Kennedy's claim of immediate implementation, highlighting administrative complexities in executing such significant policy shifts. This represents far more than a simple policy adjustment. It signals a fundamental recalibration of federal health recommendations, prioritizing different risk assessments and evidence standards. Whether this approach ultimately serves public health or creates dangerous gaps in protection will likely be debated for years to come. The immediate question for millions of American families: navigating a landscape where federal recommendations, professional medical guidance, and individual risk assessments no longer align seamlessly. To keep up with the latest news, be sure to check the suggested cards on your screen so you don't miss anything.